believe that trust comes from a position of knowing.
Ah.
Does that make sense? I mean, once you can trust your knowing, then trust is has its bounds.
Well, you're absolutely right. Let's look at trust as a dynamic of a foundation of being. All right? Trust is a foundation, but trust is built brick by brick, piece by piece. Let's take your relationship with Brenda, for example. Over the years, you have many years together, you have many adventures together, you have many dynamics of energy, you have many ups, you have many downs, you have a few sideways thrown in there as well. But each dynamic, you have built a brick, a foundation of trust with each other. All right?
It builds. Exactly right.
But that's exactly right. And you begin to, like now, here you are at a certain stage in your life. And so, in situations where you never needed to have support before, maybe now you need to have more support than you ever. And there she is, and she's right there. And because of that dynamic of loyalty, love, trust, connection, compassion, caring, because of that whole dynamic, you have a solid foundation to work from. The problem is now, between you and Brenda, between you and any of your significant others, there is a dynamic of, what shall we say, a certain dynamic of understanding that continues with that dynamic of trust. And trust, you will, if you trust it, you will not really have you, and you really know the person or the persons that you trust, you will not have unreasonable expectations of who they are.
Exactly.
Because it is only through the unreasonable expectations, and they're your expectations, dear ones. It's each of yours personally of what your expectations are. They are either real expectations of an individual or they are unreasonable expectations of an individual. And the unreasonable expectations of an individual often come from not really knowing who that other individual really is. And that, in fact, that you might have been projecting who you wish them to be rather than who they actually are. And so what winds up happening is, with the dynamic of unreasonable expectations about a situation, you wind up trusting inappropriately. And if you trust inappropriately, sometimes there are situations where you are suffering some sort of abandonment or suffering some sort of betrayal.
You're right about the learning to be able to let go of the expectations. One of the hardest things that we can do. But in reality, that is compassion. That is true understanding right there, if you can do that.
Well, but that's exactly right. Consider the levels of objectivity that one must hold in order to be able to do that without being so, what shall we say, emotionally gobsmacked yourself that you cannot, that you just move to the opposite end of the dynamic and there's no solution energetically there. But you see, what we're talking about is that, and this is the only thing that we really wish to say about it, that when trust is broken, it is usually because you as an individual have trusted the other person or had unreasonable expectations about who the other person is, rather than knowing who they really are. Now, that can be your fault. That can be a dynamic of deception. There are any number of complicated dynamics and complicated emotional dynamics that come into play in those circumstances. But in order to be able to understand and move beyond them, and move beyond them with others, not with yourself, it's one thing. You can, when we speak with you, and we speak with you from many different angles, what we're doing is often we are reprogramming. We're talking with your subconscious. So these are dynamics that become inherent within each and every one of you. So now you're getting at a point where the reflections of reality in its levels of need are beginning to impose themselves into your personal realities. And so, and hey, if reality is not pushing against you right now, be grateful. be grateful, because it's pushing against a lot of people right now. Right? And so it's about paying attention, keeping your awareness about you, and believe it or not, staying as unemotional as possible. Now, we're not telling you to not be emotional, but we're telling you that emotions are a dynamic that happen in an instant. Emotions are a dynamic of an initial response to a stimuli. Then, a millisecond after that, you react to the emotional response. And you usually react to the emotional response with an old behavior and a dynamic of an old belief. And so it is, and we realize that it's very difficult to do. You must be able to realize that there's a little bit of a space between response and reaction. And if you can remember that dynamic and just take a beat, then you will not react in the old way, and it will give you an opportunity to begin to either reinforce a new way or even create a new neural pathway, a new way of being when faced with that dynamic of fear, with that dynamic of hurt, with that dynamic of whatever the stimuli happens to be.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, and I'm thinking about that, finding that space, because I know how quick the reactions can be.
Well, it can be almost instantaneous. Yeah. That's the thing, and it's a learned behavior to be able to take a beat. But when you realize that you do take that beat, that all of a sudden it disconnects that dynamic of that emotional reaction. Yes, Sue, go ahead.
It's pretty much a form of detachment, finding that spot where you can detach yourself from those emotions and those feelings to analyze it.
You got a technique? Because it's just a matter of consciousness, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a matter of being able to inject reasoning into the emotion.
You have to be able to be able to detach yourself from the situation and those emotions and then those feelings, and then you can get a better look at it.
Right, and that can happen in an instant.
Yeah, in an instant, and in that little space.
Yep.
In that little space is where you need to find that detachment. Recognize, but it takes a little bit of finesse to know that situation. Whatever the situation is, there's a reaction, but if you can keep it to kind of like no reaction, and then step into detachment, and then step into the answer.
That sounds like a technique.
Yes. Yes, it is.